CARICOM has weathered the storms which beset our region periodically, and I would venture to say that with all our problems, our image in the eyes of the international community has never been more positive than it is today.
There is no way that our small and vulnerable states can hope on their own to dodge between the raindrops of the deluge of globalization. The cloak of deeper integration is the only shield against that storm.
There seems to be a battle, a fruitless and futile battle, being waged in the world today against the normal and just aspiration of people to run their own affairs and to rule themselves. As I reflect, I think of the needless, wasteful competition between our respective countries. As I reflect and think, there comes to mind the necessity for us to present a united Caribbean in the world of international affairs. The time has come to reflect upon the necessity for independent nations to get together into large communities for the mutual benefit and advantage of the individual territories.
Sounds familiar? A very modern-day concern, you might say, particularly when placed against the waters of international politics and the sea of changing fortunes, and quite ironic too, since that quote was taken from a speech at the third conference of Commonwealth Caribbean countries, delivered by Lyndon Forbes Burnham in March of 1965.
President Burnham was right on target, and if he were saying it now, he would be still on target, because he was anticipating what is now called globalization.
Globalization, in its economic connotation, is a central element, perhaps the central element, of the world's new realities. And globalization, involving as it does both enlarged opportunities and heightened dangers.
It would be a mistake to regard globalization as an entirely new phenomenon.
That, of course, is a new term for old obscenities. It really is a kind of natural segue from colonialism.
Given the fact that we no longer exist in a bipolar world, the effects of globalization pose a threat to smaller economies such as ours. The situation will be further aggravated when the free trade area of the Americas becomes a reality in 2005.
Well, as you know, globalization, liberalization, is a force that's going to be here, whether we like it or not. And therefore we have to get together and see how best we can fight it.
And in so doing, it would be most desirable that we should act together not as a group of countries formally associated with the British government, but as a geographical group in which we define ourselves as a single economic space.
I think the advent of globalization makes CARICOM even more relevant and necessary than ever before.
Many of our constituents will wonder whose song we are singing. They ask whether the lyrics are relevant to our development agenda. And while I will not pretend that now national politics should deter the greater regional good, I find an undeniable and instinctive rationality in our Caribbean people wanting to identify the conductors of this global symphony.
It is in the global theater that the ultimate destiny of humanity will be acted out. Our part will inevitably be a small one, but many small players will shape the nature of the sea. We owe it to ourselves to be able to answer without shame to future generations when they ask what it was that we did when the fate of the world was in balance.
period of 1985 to present saw the peoples of the Caribbean community working closely with umbrella organizations in preparation for the gathering storm of reconfigured global conditions. A generation of integrationists had burned their energies laying the early foundation for Caribbean unity. And this torch of integration is now passed on to a younger generation for its survival and prosperity in what has been dubbed the new millennium. In the final analysis, the achievements or lack thereof of this generation will make history decide whether we integrated or perished. The late Forbes Burnham's challenge to form larger communities for mutual benefit echoes more than ever in this renewed international ferment. In the latter half of the 1980s, Caribbean leaders began experiencing the rush of external gale force winds.
I think they confronted a difficult world, a world that was about to change, and many of them might have felt that this was coming, even if they couldn't see the full contours of it. Remember, this is the period, despite the Ochurious Declaration, of the emergence of Reagan and Thatcher as dominant political figures, and with them an ideology that was directly counter to the left state development ideology that was prevalent at the time, and that was to have profound consequences as the 80s developed.
From the 1981 Group of Experts report, to the Nassau Summit in 1984, to the 1988 Bonn Commission report, and then to the Grand Dance Declaration of 1989, Caribbean leaders have been making determined efforts to protect the region and its citizens against the strong winds of economic change, at each step of the way helping to map a plan of action for recovery. But even as CARICOM was grappling with its internal depressions, economic storms from the global horizon were already beginning to intrude.
The major challenge to us is being posed by the emergence of the politics of the economic regionalism. Large and powerful economic blocs are being formed or being further strengthened in all parts of the world. We are witnessing this trend in Africa, Asia, Europe, North and South America, the Pacific. For us in the Caribbean, the two most dynamic that are likely to have far-reaching implications for our economies are the decisions of Canada and the United States to convert the continent of North America into a huge free trade area, and that of the European Economic Community to dismantle all tariff barriers in 1992 and create a giant single market.
And so, in the face of renewed economic challenges, Caribbean leaders at the 10th CARICOM Summit in Grenada issued the Grand Dance Declaration and Work Program for the Advancement of the Integration Movement. This declaration laid out specific initiatives to be implemented. Among them, the establishment of an independent West Indian Commission under the chairmanship of Sir Sridhar Ramphal.
The West Indian Commission had to deal with the issue about deepening CARICOM or widening CARICOM. Deepening meant the single market and economy and the forging of supranational institutions. Very much modeled along the line of the European Union. Widening meant admitting new members, such as perhaps the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, into what would be a looser form of integration arrangement.
The Commission saw the world not so much as an aggregation of nation states, but as a global neighborhood of people. In that global neighborhood, while we were not talking about the need for world government, we were asserting the compelling needs of states to work together effectively and in ever more areas, with a deeper commitment to consensus, with less preoccupation with power, political, economic, or simply voting power. The Commission was talking about global governance.
Since the period of independence, the international relations climate had been rapidly changing, making CARICOM from its inception develop the need to deepen and widen its flagship through economic and functional cooperation and through the inclusion of other states in the Caribbean. In pursuit of this mandate, the West Indian Commission recommended the widening of the integration process to include the countries of Latin America. As a result, the Association of Caribbean States was born.
And if you look at the report of the Commission, Time for Action, it is clear that what they saw, and I think they were also visionary at the time, that what they saw was the necessity for an association which would widen functional cooperation of CARICOM states with their primarily Latin neighbors in the broader Caribbean region. And that has succeeded perhaps even beyond the expectations of the writers of Time for Action. The Association of Caribbean States was in fact launched in 1994. The convention was signed. The countries of the Group of Three, Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela, all supported its establishment very strongly. Cuba and the Dominican Republic and Haiti supported its establishment as a means of overcoming their historical isolation from the rest of the Caribbean. And Central America also supported its establishment because all of Central America, or most of Central America, borders on the Caribbean Sea.
They responded with alacrity to ACS, and they are in it. And I think it's to their credit that they have allowed somebody from the English-speaking Caribbean, from the Commonwealth Caribbean, to be the Director General or whatever it is now. And we hope that this will, more of this will take place.
But what would we expect from it? One, we would expect discussions about common issues facing the ACS countries. And they have identified areas such as tourism, transportation, as areas that they're working on.
And so far, the Association of Caribbean States has had 3 meetings of heads of state, the one to sign the convention, and 2 summits. A 3rd summit is coming up.
Again, the meeting of these ministers and heads of government become a useful forum for discussing differences, discussing strategies.
It has established a full legal personality. The convention, the regulations, the secretariat is established in headquarters in a CARICOM state in Port of Spain, Trinidad. It has a functioning and well-equipped secretariat. And most importantly, it has identified 4 core areas for functional cooperation. And these areas are trade, sustainable tourism, transport, and cooperation in the management of natural disasters. And in each of those areas, there is a plan of action.
This is the forum through which CARICOM can interact with Central America, with Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia, so that from that perspective alone, it is worth it.
It is indispensable if you want to expand economic activity, to tackle pollution, to check greenhouse warming, to combat pandemic disease, to curb the spread of weapons, to prevent deserts growing, to preserve genetic diversity, to save species from extinction, to deter terrorists, to ward off famine, to defeat economic recession, to share scarce resources, to defeat the culture of narcotics. And the list is much longer. None of this, not any one of these areas, is an area in which we can go it alone. We can only achieve success by working together consensually, by acting multilaterally, using the tools of global governance.
The 1981 Group of Experts report, the 1982 Bonn Commission report, and the 1992 report of the West Indian Commission, Time for Action, were important studies done to ensure the survival of the Caribbean community. Of the three, it was Time for Action that gave the most up-to-date signal for the kind of preparation needed if Caribbean people were to cope with the global relations climate of the 21st century.
But we know, of course, under federation, that thing of freedom of movement was a problem. And while understandably, you can't eat your cake and cut your calories. And a serious decision will have to be taken by CARICOM members about the movement of our people from one place to another.
We see the Caribbean as really one Caribbean. We see our people in the Caribbean as one family. And therefore to us it's extremely important for us to always work hard at the question of bringing about a greater closeness of the people.
I think unless we address the issue with a greater sense of urgency and purposefulness, we may well find that more Caribbean people would ignore the boundaries of the state and move, as in fact many of them are moving, unlawfully. And that's why I say let us start with the OECS.
You know, I can't believe it, but it's true. You can travel to any of the OECS countries now without your passport. Yes, all you need is your driver's license, voter registration card, ID card, social security card, and you could travel. Once it's valid and have your picture and nationality on them, you could travel. And if they don't have that, you could walk with your birth certificate. You could spend up to 6 months in any of the OECS countries once you have a valid return ticket and proof that you could pay to stay. Yes, man. So it's not about traveling, family in pain because I'm visiting everybody and I'm staying by them too. OECS making travel easy. It's about time.
When I was on the West Indian Commission, and this again was an initiative taken by the CARICOM heads of government to really look at the region and see what are the real deep concerns of our people. We were fascinated with, we all were fascinated by what concerned the people themselves. They complained all over that they were really treated like aliens in the region. They arrive into this or that island, and some immigration officer can't wait to treat them with a kind of disdain, and they look through the corner of their eyes and they see Canadians and Americans going through on the basis of their IDs or driver's license. And you know, this in a way is a kind of self-contempt and an insult to ourselves.
The truth is that thousands of ordinary Caribbean people do in fact live that reality every day.
Well, in fairness to many of the governments, they responded to one of the recommendations of the West Indian Commission. Artists, for example, going to perform would not have to go through the problem of work permits. Graduates of the university to begin with, I'm sure it will extend later on, could work in any territory of CARICOM, so the labor market becomes freer.
Well, it's an indication of the collaboration, the cohesion between what we do at the university, the regional movement, and national governments. There are 7 prime ministers who have graduated from the University of the West Indies. They include the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Prime Minister of Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados. While it is true that the regional movement has never depended on the graduates, so to speak, the fact is that it makes sense for the 7 people who have graduated from the university to understand take a regional perspective.
I'm quite convinced that all governments recognize that we must work together to implement this as a basic and fundamental policy. If we are serious about the integration process, we have absolutely no choice. We have seen how bigger countries in Europe and other parts of the world are uniting, allowing freedom of movement of the people, are using the skills of the people throughout the bigger countries to unite forces and to gain economic opportunities in all aspects of development. So I don't see how we could do otherwise here, and I think the region is quite ready. I think the people understand it much more than they did before, and I'm quite sure the leaders understand the absolute importance of this issue.
Central to much of the work that is being done, with an eye on the future development of CARICOM, is the establishment of the single market and economy. In fact, this meeting has before it, for consideration, the project schedule for getting to that goal.
Decision towards the end of the 1980s to create a single market and economy was a deliberate decision intended to shift the balance a bit and to drive the internal processes more.
As we convene at this 39th meeting of Council, we have set ourselves one principal goal. That is the establishment of a single market and economy. Drawing heavily, as we are, from the EEC experience, perhaps the lone success story in this regard to date.
CARICOM single market and economy is going to be a necessity. It's difficult for many of our islands to make the adjustment to it. Some countries are more ready than others. Some countries like Trinidad and Tobago, with their cheap oil and gas, they have an advantage to production goods. And in terms of population, vis-a-vis a country like Antigua, they have great economies of scale, and therefore they're in a better position to be competitive, because that's what it means, that the market is open.
The person who goes to market to sell their fruit, the person who's walking down the street to a shop to buy something, and want to know where they can get a good piece of cloth that comes from Trinidad, or where they get a good piece of cloth that must come from America. Those are the sort of things that we're not working on, we're not thinking about.
As far as the integration movement is concerned, I think that is where it has been disappointing. I think there have been some successes, but there has also been a massive failure, and I think we have to face it. Successes clearly are there to the extent that a certain number of regional services have been developed, have survived, common shipping, that sort of thing. Successful to the extent that there is now a foreign exchange clearinghouse and a certain amount of cooperation between the central banks of the region. Those are good things and very positive aspects of the integration process. Very disappointing in the total failure of the region to develop any meaningful economic projects that would reflect the heart and soul of the integration process.
We have been working assiduously to bring into being the single market and economy. It consists of 9 protocols which cover a range of items and areas which are necessary to make the single market a reality. But we recognize that there has to be an adjustment process within each member territory. And it has to begin by an understanding of what the single market and economy would really entail. And it is our collective view that we can't bring this single market into operation before there is the requisite understanding, certainly by agencies of government, by the private sector, those who have to engage in businesses, the trade union movement, because it is going to affect considerations of labor. And that process of public education needs to be intensified. Now, the creation of a single market and economy does not mean that disputes between member territories will automatically disappear. If you look at the European Union, you'll recognize that not only have those internal differences not disappeared, but in fact, they have had to put into place a juridical system that can resolve disputes when they occur.
We should have done like what the European Union did. They started off with a smaller grouping. And then as they got more confidence in themselves, then they start to widen the movement. I believe that thereby extended this thing, widening it. I believe a lot of it is sentiment. It was based on geography, not really on our own history.
In moving to establish the CARICOM single market and economy, we must let our people appreciate the fact that it is a process, not an event which happens miraculously. We cannot just turn a switch and expect it to begin operating immediately. Our people must understand this if they are not to be disillusioned by the pace of developments. Although we all agree on the urgency of the establishment of the single market and economy, if it is to become a reality, there must be patient, painstaking creation of the requisite arrangements and institutions.
Every island is different. Its trading desires, its trading necessities are different. I mean, like Antigua is interested in its tourism. It is the main thing for Antigua. We can't say it's the main thing for Dominica, at least not yet. And we as an agricultural country, Dominica produces things that people can eat. We don't even try to sell to Antigua. I understand that in the last 4 years, we've never shipped a citrus fruit to Antigua. Antigua is a tourist island. They're required to have our citrus fruit. We don't try to do things with each other that benefit each other. Although we say we're an OECS, we're a region, each island looks after itself and what it thinks is best for itself. We don't sit down together and think, well, if we take this measure, Dominica will benefit because they're able to sell their fruit to us. Antigua will benefit because they will have a happier tourist ambiance to be used by the visitors. I don't think we're thinking that way, and if we're not thinking that way, then I don't see that we can get anything out of talking about ourselves as a region.
Let us look to see what we've done in the past. When we started the Lomé negotiations, we decided that we were going together as a CARICOM team. And so successful were we with Sir Sridhar Ramphal and his team. So successful were we then in negotiation that our team, the Caribbean team, became the principal negotiators for the whole of the ACP. But we frittered away that advantage. We frittered it away. Now it's for us to realize and build on the success we had then, get a good team, and advance our interest.
Absolutely. This is what the regional negotiating machinery was designed to do. And it does that, I thought, quite effectively, and has been doing that for the last 5 years.
We had the advantage of the sort of expertise in the region which could give the leadership. I refer to Sir Sridhar Ramphal, who himself had been associated with all the development initiatives taken to see the kind of world we should live in after the post-war, from the Brandt Report right through to the Brundtland and others. And he had this tremendous international exposure and reputation as Secretary General of the Commonwealth. That was an advantage. And then, of course, his assistant to former Vice Chancellor of the University, Sir Alistair McIntyre, who himself had been in charge of CARICOM, but had tremendous experience in the United Nations system. I think we were very lucky to have had them to lead the way, and I think that should continue. We were able to display a common front on the banana question, for example. And many people may be dissatisfied with what we have achieved, but had it not been for that negotiating machinery device, we would have been out in the cold.
At the conference in Doha, which was concluded towards the end of last year, we got for the first time an acceptance that small economies deserve very, very special considerations, and we also got approval for the waiver of the Cotonou Agreement that relates to the countries of Europe and the ACP to which we belong. And I would say that despite our relative smallness in size, the voice of Caribbean countries has come to command respect in international fora.
On some matters we heard, I mean, the country has a lot of capable, the region has a lot of capable individuals, and when we put our mind state, we can make good representation. But basically we're a small country. We are a recent colonial peoples and countries, and it is felt in some quarters that our sense of national identity and sovereignty and so forth are not fully developed because we don't have a long historical tradition of being a country. It is felt that we approach the international community almost in a reflex way with a begging bowl. Everything we want to do, the first thing we ask is how much assistance we can get for it. So whether we want a CCJ or we want a development fund for ourselves, we start first of all seeing how much foreign assistance we can get. And that type of reflex action, I think, is indicative of a state of underdeveloped sense of national and regional identity. And I think it's a weakness that many people have told me is exhibited by the Caribbean in international fora.
I can only instance the fact that at the Doha ministerial meeting, despite all of the preoccupations of the rest of the world with the big issues of the day in international trade, we managed to get a work committee work program established on small economies, which is much more than a lot of other groupings had done.
The best thing we have going for us is the large number of countries, because we're about 15.
When you go to choose the Secretary General of the OAS or the Director General of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture, or any of these major posts, CARICOM is a major voice.
What I'm very heartened about, though, is the efforts that have been put into coordinating our positions over the last maybe 7-8 years or so in relation to some of the major changes that are taking place institutionally around the world. What I had in mind here are the changes within the WTO, the ACP-EU relations, the NAFTA, and to some extent within CARICOM itself.
And so, in the decade of the 90s, CARICOM began implementing a new set of rules and mechanisms in preparation for the climatic changes brought about by regional and international developments. In this scenario, the CARICOM Secretariat emerged as an important instrument of action.
The first, I would say that a regional overall view of the economy of the region emerged from the work of the Secretariat. Then you had foreign policy advice and negotiations, which I don't think anyone would challenge the fact that the regional negotiating machinery, which is an outcome of the work of the Secretariat, has delivered.
Cuba is not a member of CARICOM, but Cuba is a contributor to the Caribbean Regional Negotiating Machinery. So we are working together in the WTO with the Dominican Republic as well, which is a contributor to the RNM. And secondly, we have carefully defined what the areas of our interests are and are pursuing them with consistency and determination.
Then we had what I would call a regional approach to tackling things like AIDS, that really are not national issues, they're across the whole region and can best, if at all, be well tackled, be done on a regional basis.
We consider HIV/AIDS to be a threat to our nation's security, to our region's security, and to forward progress. One of the important aspects of our CARICOM relationship is the fact that we can lend assistance to one another, and the Bahamas is prepared to share its expertise in this area to the extent of our resources.
The containment of the disease must now be accorded a new priority in our national consciousness. In this regard, enhanced levels of expenditure and the expansion of education programs to increase awareness will be of critical importance to the region.
But probably one of the most critical benefits is how the outside world has seen us as a result of the existence of an institution as the Secretariat. The focus.
We are one of the few integration movements that have applicants to it in the 21st century. It's not therefore that we simply survived. We have expanded our influence. And if you want to measure this, if you want to measure the significance, every year when the heads meet, look at the international press.
What I think has been driving us is the impact of globalization. We suddenly realized that we have many things in common, that we've entered into global commitments separately that bind all of us. And in the process, we're now looking for ways in which we might cooperate to deal with the consequences of that. But in terms of taking concrete decisions based on a regional vision and a regional conception of the region, I don't think that we've advanced very close to that.
We had a very extensive review of the performance of CARICOM when we met in Trinidad and Tobago towards the very end of the last century. We could not claim that CARICOM has achieved within the time frame we had anticipated every objective we had set for CARICOM. But CARICOM has now become the longest surviving regional common market among all developing countries. We have made considerable progress. We still have more to do.
And part of that doing called for reconciling domestic agendas with regional obligations.
It is very, very difficult for small countries such as ours to look at the bigger picture, because the domestic picture is so intense and impacts upon you so much on a day-to-day basis. And in Antigua's case, where we have a problem that we employ nearly twice or three times as many people as any other OECS country, and the cash flow problem, the fiscal imbalance that causes, that is clearly a problem that we have, which we have to deal with a certain immediacy, and therefore it makes it more difficult for us to make decisions in the wider regional movement.
I don't find a difficulty in a strategic sense. Let us examine the state at which we are in the OECS and Caribbean. In the OECS, we have a central bank, common central bank, common currency. We have a unified Supreme Court and appellate court system. The magistracy is not unified. We have an OECS education reform project. We purchase drugs in bulk, pharmaceuticals. We have common positions on international trade. And the OECS is assisting us here in St. Vincent in the preparation of our work for both the ministerial meeting in Brussels and for Doha, shortly to take place. CARICOM, of course, assists in that regard too. We're evolving a single market and economy. There are a lot of enterprises from Trinidad and Barbados and St. Vincent, and there's a greater ease of the movement of professional skills and services through the whole region than existed hitherto. So all those matters, coordinating work and disaster preparedness, all those matters are issues upon which the domestic agenda and the regional agenda are identical.
Even from times predating our independence, it has long been recognized that there are certain common interests which all of us in the Caribbean share. I have operated on the basis of what I call concentric circles.
And the important thing is for those concentric circles of integration to link and connect with one another in such a way that overall the efficacy of the integration movement is enhanced. Let's take currently. You have the OECS, which is the tightest concentric circle in terms of its integration mechanism. Outside of that is CARICOM. Then outside of that still is an organization like the ACS, the Association of Caribbean States.
The wider circle being the hemisphere to which we belong, and the widest circle of all, the international globe, of which Jamaica and other countries in the Caribbean must be a part.
Dr. Kenny Anthony once said that history has made us exotic, geography has made us appealing, and our people, by their ideas and achievements, have already given us a stature in the world that defies our physical limitations as small island economies. It is for this reason that CARICOM must become the touchstone of integration. But to successfully achieve this, CARICOM Secretary General Edwin Carrington is convinced that there must be a mutual trust, consistently reflected in more participatory structures and practices that embrace the confidence of our people and their industriousness.
I would like to see, in a sense, more militancy among the population for unity and regional development. Much more dynamic action, much more complaining when it's not happening, much more pressure for it to happen. Because, you know, unless the population shows this interest, there's no point sitting back and blaming leaders when leaders do not go as far as you may hope. But leaders are taking the temperature of their political constituency, and they are not going to go beyond where they feel that they will get political support. So the population itself has to be preoccupied with this thing. It is the people, therefore, who has to make this work. And if the people really want it to happen, I think it would happen.
Our early traders and entrepreneurs, higglers, hucksters, informal commercial importers, call them what you like, have all helped to create and maintain close economic ties among our countries, despite the strictures and structures of national boundaries. History has shown too that our community-based and voluntary organizations have all played their part in transforming this separating sea into a bridge, linking our efforts through cultural and community exchanges. A vision of cooperation that saw not obstacles, but opportunities. As we continue to battle for what the West Indian Commission defined as the soul of the Caribbean nation, it's become imperative for us to consolidate our common interests and identity, nurtured by those persistent pioneers of integration who fought to determine their fates and fortunes across what Walcott describes as miles of cerulean silk in a star-apple kingdom.
To take on the rest of the world, to compete and take home the gold. We can't wait and wait to fully integrate. Free up barriers and have one Caribbean state.
We have put together in one volume the speeches, the aspirations. We have documented the hopes. We have documented the issues that have been discussed in one place. But I've taken this on as a personal matter because I strongly believe in the integration movement. More than that, I have undertaken this so that the record of the past can be available to our research students as a point of reference. And I think that's important. We've also done other books, the other books such as the one on CARICOM in the Caribbean in the 21st century. We have done the other one on CARICOM Beyond Survival, in a sense explaining why CARICOM, despite all the predictions that it would have collapsed in the 70s, survives today and is actually thriving. So it is a personal commitment, but more than that, I am doing it from the context that this is an important issue for our own education, for our knowledge, and in a sense, a legacy, if you wish, to future generations.
This television documentary was based on the book Integrate or Perish, Perspectives of Leaders of the Integration Movement, 1963 to 1999, edited by Professor Kenneth O. Hall, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Jamaica. Integrate or Perish is a presentation of the UE CARICOM project.